Content warning. This episode discusses the murder of a woman in her home and the investigation that followed. It refers to sexually explicit language given in sworn evidence at the inquest. That language was set out in episode 4 and is not repeated here. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know needs support, contact Lifeline on 131114 or 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or your local crisis service. This is not a case where the evidence vanished immediately. A man was seen leaving Mary Anne Fagan's front gate at 12:10. He was not running. He was not hiding. He looked back at the house, looked both ways along Dandenong Road, and walked away in a service uniform. That sighting was not ignored at first. It became a major investigative lead. Police checked Air Force bases. They conducted identity parades. A photo fit was released. The man was searched for across Victoria. And then the investigation moved. Not because the man was identified. Not because the witness withdrew. Not because the uniform was explained. But because, on the public record, another man, a council worker outside the house that morning, came to occupy the frame. This final part is about that movement. Not just what police found, but what the case gradually learned to look away from. And it asks one question. Was the man in uniform treated as a question about Mary Anne Fagan's private life when he may have been the answer to something much simpler? How her killer got through the door. Part 6. Mary Anne Fagan. This final part does not name a suspect. It does not claim to know who killed Mary Anne Fagan or why, but it does test a possibility that the public record does not show being fully examined or resolved. That the uniform may have mattered not because of who Mary Anne knew, but because of what the uniform appeared to mean. The morning after Mary Anne Fagan was murdered, a man came forward to police of his own accord. He had not been contacted. He had not been pressed. He had heard the news overnight, recognised that what he had seen the day before might matter, and gave a statement. He was Hugh. He had served in the Navy, which meant he knew service dress when he saw it. He described the man at the gate with care. Thick-set, around 5'7", about 35, clean-shaven, mousy hair, a peaked cap, and a uniform he identified specifically as the new-style RAAF summer dress. He said he believed he could recognise the man again. Those details mattered. It was not simply a blue uniform. It was a particular pattern of service dress, one introduced in the early 1970s, and Hugh identified it as Air Force. And it fitted the season. The summer form of that uniform set the jacket aside for a short-sleeved shirt, and mid-February was high summer. So what Hugh identified was not just an Air Force uniform, but a version of it that made sense for the day. Police treated it as a major lead. Publicly, the man in uniform was described as a significant suspect, and the uniform lead was treated as one of the strongest lines of inquiry in the case. Police considered that the uniform may have helped the man gain entry to Mary Anne's house. And they acted on it. A photo fit was compiled and published in The Age and in newspapers across the country. Hugh was taken to identity parades at RAAF bases across Victoria to walk the lines and look. The Air Force supply stores were checked in case the man had recently bought his uniform. A liaison was set up with the RAAF's own police. And then a second witness came forward. Doug, a stranger to Hugh, with no connection to the case, had picked up a hitchhiker on Dandenong Road that same lunchtime, a man in a blue military-style uniform running across the road, signalling for a lift. He was not described in exactly the same way as the man Hugh saw, and the uniform was not identified with the same certainty. But the overlap still mattered. The same broad road environment, the same lunchtime period, and another man in uniform close enough in time and place to be treated as part of the same lead. Two witnesses who did not know each other. Two sightings on Dandenong Road. Not identical. Not perfect. But close enough that, for about 2 months, this was the case. By April 1978, the investigative emphasis had shifted. The view that took hold was that the sighting was, almost certainly, the husband on a different day, a glimpse of Group Captain Fagan, misremembered into the morning of her murder. And the attention of the case turned from the gate to the corner, to the 3 council workmen repairing the road, and among them to one man. In the broadcast of this series, we have called him James. It is not hard to see why he drew the eye. He had been on the corner all morning. He had spoken to Mary Anne directly at her own property about the silt in her driveway. He had sat on her front fence and said vile things about her to the man beside him. He had left the worksite alone during the period the investigation came to treat as the murder window. He had come back with money he could not account for, and when he was finally questioned in detail, he lied, across 3 statements, to 3 different officers about the conversation, the driveway, the absence, the bookmaker. At the inquest, the coroner named him in open court as far from honest. A man who behaves like that is easy to keep in the frame. He looks like a guilty man. But looking like a guilty man is not the same as fitting the murder. Here is a line this whole part turns on. Not every concealment, omission, embarrassment, or inconsistency inside a homicide investigation is concealment of murder. James lied, but each of his lies had an available explanation that was not murder. He had backed a horse with an illegal SP bookmaker. He had walked off a council job without leave. He had a private quote he had mentioned to no one. He had a crude, shameful conversation he did not want repeated, and a reputation for bravado built on borrowed expressions his own partner had never heard him use at home. Every one of those things was worth hiding. None of them by itself make him the killer. A man concealing a murder has one lie that has to hold above all others, that he was not there. That lie has to survive everything because the alternative is unthinkable. James's lies were not shaped like that. On the public record, they were a tangle of small, separate, shameful secrets, and they came apart one at a time in the order pressure was applied to them. That is not how one great single lie behaves. And there is the man himself. James talked. He talked his way into every problem he was in that day. He told his workmate about the bet and showed him the cash. He named the bookmaker to a constable on the night of the murder. He could not hold a small secret for half a day. We are asked to believe that this same man held the largest secret imaginable in perfect silence from February 1978 until his death. The lies were real. They simply do not behave like lies about a murder. set the case against him out plainly, and it divides in two. The things that pointed at James he could account for. His presence on the corner, he worked there. His footprints in the driveway, he had walked it twice that morning, once with Mary Anne and once with the foreman, by his own admission. The flecks that behaved like bitumen on a garment in the house. The crew laid hot mix all morning with a tar pot on the public footpath. The industrial boot print at the rear gate. His boots were that type, and so were the boots of the other men on a 3-man crew. The money, the bet. The omissions, shame, drink, and a memory he himself said the grog had ruined. No positive forensic match was ever recorded against him. The things the case needed him to explain, he could not. The man in service uniform at the gate at 12:10, when James was at the depot eating his lunch in front of the other men. The door itself, how a man in council blues, a toweling hat and work boots, a man Mary Anne had met once that morning about a council matter, got a private woman to leave her hair dye half finished and open her own front door. And the witness, why a man who never wavered, who came forward unprompted, and who, brought down onto the floor of the court to compare himself directly with the husband, allowed a similarity, and then said, "But I would say no," was treated in the end as though he had seen nothing at all. Decades later, when the case was reviewed, the council worker thread was finally put to a test that had not existed in 1978. By then, James had died. The other workman, the man we have called Ken, was re-interviewed, denied any involvement, and gave a DNA sample to be compared against material held from the scene. That review did not result in him being charged. No one was ever charged. James could be a liar and still not be the man at the gate. The public record never reconciled the two. In the inquest material, the gate receded, and the liar remained. This is the thing the case turned away from, and it is the one thing on the public record that most directly explains the door. Start with one later public explanation for turning away from the uniform lead. It was not only that the man at the gate was said to probably be her husband, seen on another day. It was also a claim about Mary Anne herself. That explanation rested on the idea that Mary Anne was a very moral woman, and therefore there was no reason another man would have been at the house. This is not a criticism of any individual investigator's good faith. It is a test of the reasoning that appears on the public record. Look at the shape of that. It is a claim about who a woman like Mary Anne would open her door to, and it rests on the floor laid underneath it without being spoken. That the only man who could belong at her house was one she already knew, or one she had reason to expect. Rule that out, and the man at the gate has to be her husband, because no one else belongs there. But someone else was there. She was murdered in that house. Whoever killed her got inside, and her character had nothing to do with it. The door was not forced. A security screen had been fitted to the front a week before. Whoever killed her did not break in. A stranger entering that house is the one thing the reasoning said could not happen. But the murder itself shows that someone got inside. The premise that Mary Anne's morality could settle who was at her house is answered by the very crime the case was built to solve. And then the reasoning turns all the way over. Because the one explanation that lets a careful private woman open her door mid-task to a man who is not her husband is the explanation the case set down. Mary Anne had been a service wife for 17 years. Her husband was a group captain, the commanding officer of the No. 1 Stores Depot at Tottenham. That morning he was away at the base where he had stayed overnight after a function. She was alone in the house with her baby, halfway through dyeing her hair. a private process her husband described as one she would not interrupt for an ordinary caller. She disliked doing it in front of even her own family. A council labourer with a quote she had not asked for struggles to explain that door. A man in service uniform explains it far more readily. Because a uniform at that door may not have read as a visit. It may have read as a notification. Something had happened to him at the base. And if that is what Mary Anne believed, the rest becomes easier to understand. You do not finish your hair. You do not treat it as an ordinary interruption. You walk down the hall and you open the door. That may be the mechanism. It is the explanation in the record that most directly accounts for the single most difficult fact in the case, that Mary Anne opened her own front door, mid-task, to someone she had no ordinary reason to admit. And the uniform explains what follows too. The trust, the compliance, the unhurried walk back out through the gate in broad daylight. A man in service dress on a suburban street in 1978 was visible, but he was explicable. He belonged to a category people did not stop to question. Mary Anne's character was never the reason to set the man in uniform aside. Read the other way, it may be the reason the uniform mattered. If the man Hugh saw was the killer, the uniform may have been how he got in. It may also have been how he got out. And it may be why a watched corner on a busy morning produced a man almost no one looked at twice. So what could still close this? Begin with what the case is not short of. It is not short of physical evidence. The Forensic Science Laboratory catalogued material from the scene. Hair, the torn towel used to bind her, the gag, the cigarette burnt to the filter, swabs, and fibres held in Mary Anne's hand. The handbag was taken and never recovered. Whatever weapon was used was not recovered. If either ever surfaced, it would matter differently now than it did in 1978. What survives and in what condition is not something this series can know. Some may be exhausted. Some may be gone. Some may sit in a form nothing can now read. That is a question only Victoria Police can answer. But the physical half of this case did not vanish in 1978. The same later review that re-examined the council worker thread involved DNA comparison against material from the scene, which means that, at least at that point, there was still something there to test. Because that may be how a case like this ends. Not by science alone, and not by memory alone. The two are not rival answers. They are two halves of one. A name, held by someone who remembers, set against material held since 1978. The case can begin to close in the moment one reaches the other. Which is why identifying the man at the gate would not on its own be the answer. It would be one half of it. The half no laboratory can supply, and the public may be able to. The other half waits in whatever still survives for a name to test it against. And of the two halves, the one that needs you is the face. There is a limit here, and it matters. This series cannot know what sits inside the current Homicide Squad file. We do not know whether the uniform lead was later abandoned, privately resolved, or simply left out of recent public appeals for investigative reasons. Victoria Police may hold information that has never been made public. So the point is not that police today are ignoring this lead. The point is narrower, and it is the only one this series can safely make. On the public record, the man in uniform was once treated as one of the strongest leads in Mary Anne Fagan's murder, and nothing publicly available explains how that lead was resolved. In 1978, the public was asked to identify a man in uniform, not simply a man. And that may be part of why he was never found. The uniform was how he passed unquestioned on the day. It may also be how he passed unrecognised afterward, because the people who could have known that face may have known it as a man, not as a serviceman, and set the memory aside as not fitting what police were asking for. So we are putting the photo fit where you can see it. On the Civilian Sleuth's Facebook page, on Instagram and on X. Look at the face. Set the uniform aside. The uniform may have been how he got through the door. It is not who he was. And there is one kind of man the searchers of 1978 may have struggled to reach. Every check the investigation made, the parades, the supply stores, the RAAF's own police, was directed towards a serving airman, a man who could be lined up and matched. A man who had left the Air Force, who kept his uniform and knew how to wear it, may not have stood in any parade or appeared in any current service check. That does not make him the answer. A former member is not the only way a man could come to possess a uniform. But it is one way the official searchers could have missed the person Hugh saw. And the uniform narrows the question. What Hugh described was not the old service dress. It was the newer pattern the Air Force adopted in 1972. So if the man at the gate was a former airman, the dress itself may date him. Still serving in or after 1972, long enough to be issued that pattern, and gone from the service before the 1978 identity parades, when serving airmen were the ones being checked. A narrow band. A man whose service may have run into the early or middle 1970s, who may have left before the active searches were done, and who kept the uniform he had been issued. So if you remember someone, this is who we are asking about. A man who served in the RAAF in the early or middle 1970s, long enough to have been issued the new uniform, particularly anyone around Tottenham or the No. 1 stores depot. A man who left the service or was discharged before the searches were conducted and kept his uniform, who wore it or held onto it after he had any reason to. Someone connected to Armidale, Malvern, Toorak, Tottenham, or to the Fagan family who you have wondered about over the years. Someone who changed after the 17th of February 1978, who stopped talking about the Air Force, who put a uniform away, who left Victoria, who was never quite the same. You do not need to be sure. And there is one thing this series asks of you. Do not name anyone publicly. Do not approach families. Do not try to test this yourself. Say what you remember to Crime Stoppers and let the people whose job it is decide whether it connects. Victoria Police Crime Stoppers accepts information anonymously. You do not need to give your name and you do not need to walk into a station. You can call or report online and your identity will not be recorded unless you choose to give it. The reward, up to $1 million for information leading to the apprehension and subsequent conviction of the person or persons responsible, remains active. On the morning of the 17th of February 1978, Mary Anne Fagan made her children's school lunches, drove one of her sons to school, spoke to her husband on the telephone and set up the bathroom to dye her hair for a function the next night. She was 41, a mother of 5. Her baby was in the house with her. She never washed the dye out. Her older children came home from school that afternoon and found her. For 48 years, those children, now adults, have waited to know who walked into their house that day. Someone did see him. One person looked at his face on the way out the gate and never forgot it, and was never shaken from it, not even when shown the man police thought it might be. The question is not whether the man was seen. The question is who he was. Who killed Mary Anne Fagan? If you have information, any information, that could assist the investigation into the murder of Mary Anne Fagan, please contact Victoria Police Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000 or submit a confidential report online at www.police.vic.gov.au/crime-stoppers. The investigation remains open. Victoria Police has not closed this case, and the reward of up to $1 million remains active. If you served with the Royal Australian Air Force in Victoria in the 1970s, and you remember a man, a former member, a discharged member, anyone connected to the service who you have wondered about, that memory may matter. This has been Civilian Sleuths, Series 2, Mary Anne Fagan. Some names and non-essential identifying details have been changed for privacy. All court events and timings are drawn from publicly available records, inquest materials, and contemporaneous reporting. Unsolved, unforgotten, unfinished.